In the Kenyan slum of Kibera, one of the massive shanty towns on the outskirts of the capital, Nairobi. The slum is made majorly of 13 villages, but the people from Soweto and Kianda seem to have an unspoken hatred between each other. Abila, an intuitive 14-year-old boy from Soweto East, doesn't buy into the hatred because he has friends from both sides, and they mostly engage in a game of chicken on the rail track to see who would chicken first. However, Abila has a fear of trains, and sometimes it gives him nightmares. He awakens to a disturbance outside caused by irate customers. It turns out that his father operates a convenience store in the adjacent room but hasn't yet opened. He goes back in and finds his father sick and in a delirious state. He informs his son that a woman took his soul and he isn't here anymore. The boy couldn't comprehend the nonsense his father is saying when he can clearly see him in front of him. Unsure of what to do, he decides to tell his mother, a weaver on the other side of the slum. A suspicious man follows him as he runs through the congested streets after spotting him. He arrives at the shop where his mother works and informs her of his father's worrying state, but she dismisses it, assuming he is likely drunk. He leaves her, while walking and pondering on his next line of action. He meets and confronts the man who had been following him. He turns out to be his dad's former worker whom he let go of because of his propensity for being drunk, and Abila isn't supposed to be talking to him since he is from Kianda. He revealed he knows about his father's whereabouts the previous night, but would only tell if compensated with a smoke, which Abila obliged. He then revealed that his father was with a woman called Nyawawa, a supposed witch who has a cow's leg and drains the souls of her victims. Abila protests since Nyawawa is just stories like his dad said. But the man tells him to go to a river in South Kibera border and he would find her among the darkest shadows. Abila quickly proceeds to the location. However, Shiku, his love interest, sees him and tries to play a game of hide and seek, but he isn't having any of it. He wouldn't tell her of his mission, but when she offered to be of help, he agrees. However, he is called by some other friends who Shiku dislikes and it appears they reciprocate her feelings. He tells them he is looking for the witch, and since they are textbook examples of assholes, they refer him to Shiku, while making fun of her because Nyawawa means spirit of the dead. They all came up with various theories and tales about the witch, whose real name is Akinyi. According to Shiku, she is a reincarnated woman who committed suicide by drowning herself when she learned that her lover had left her for a particular tourist and is now returning to exact revenge on cheating men. This makes the boys laugh and make fun of her even more. Gunshots are then heard, and the boys run towards it rather than away from it. Shiku and Abila continue on their mission. They get into a small lovers' argument, and Abila reveals that the issue with his father is the reason he is distant and that he is determined to find the person who stole his soul. Shiku purposefully withheld a crucial piece of information from her earlier account, namely, that Akinyi was her nanny, because if she had, Abila's friends would have used it against her. She takes him to Akinyi's house but declines to enter with him because Akinyi only interacts with men and wouldn't come out if she went along. The witch appears briefly as he enters the building and walks past. He immediately pursues her and eventually finds her sitting in a dark room with one human leg and a cow leg. She is self-conscious about her appearance and asks Abila not to get any closer. She initially refused when he told her he wanted his father's soul back because she thought he was only a boy and not a man. After seeing his dedication, she agreed. However, in order to free his father, he must complete 7 tasks that are a reflection of his father's flaws before the next morning. She appears from various angles and tells him that a sign in the shape of the sun will appear before each task, namely, 1. He has to slip into someone else's skin and inhabit it in front of others. 2. Pay someone else's debt without stealing from someone else. 3. Help a sinner who's in trouble without judging him. 4. Fight a battle against a new world. 5. Use your wits to save someone else's life. 6. Discover an unknown place and understand the difference, and finally to confront the monstrous snake, the one he fears the most. Before leaving, she warns him not to tell anyone about the task, if not his efforts will be in vain. Outside, Shiku was still waiting for him, and because the witch warned him not to reveal his tasks, he didn't tell Shiku about them. He spots the first sign from the sun and they headed towards it. On their way they came across a crowd gathered around a dead man, which could explain the gunshots earlier. Abila's friends who were also present and had seen him leave with Shiku then follows him. The sun shape led them to another crowd watching a street play. The play is a comedy about the roles parents play in a household. One of the performers then calls on Abila to perform as his father on stage. He recalls the witch's words to slip into someone else's life, and he then went on stage. Shiku is then called to perform her mother. The play goes well, making their audience laugh, until Abby notices another sign on their landlord's thug's clothing and abruptly leaves to follow them. Shiku follows him as well. It turns out that the landlord was going to his house to serve his father with an eviction notice if he did not pay his rent, which appears to be his second task. But where is a 14-year-old boy going to get such a large sum of money? As if this isn't enough trouble for him, a man being pursued by a crowd runs to him and Shiku, and he is made to hide him, fulfilling the third task of assisting a sinner in trouble without judging him. The crowd eventually arrived there as well, and Shiku gave them a false indication of the man's direction. Nevertheless, one of them didn't believe her, and when the man checked the doorway leading to Abila's room and discovered it was empty, he started to leave. Shiku inquired about the man's crimes, and he revealed that the man had stolen his phone. When the commotion subsided, the thief proceeded to leave, thanking Abila and handing over the phone because things could get worse if they found it on him. Abila intends to sell the phone and use the proceeds to pay his father's rent, oblivious to the fact that he will be just as guilty as the thief and will fail the task. Shiku tries to make him see the flaws in his thoughts, but when that fails, she abandons him angrily. He chases after her anyway, but he can't find her. Instead, he sees another sign, which turns out to be his mother's sister, Auntie Susan, who was leaving for Karen, a suburb and home to expats and high-income Kenyans. He'd never been there before, and going there would complete his next task of conquering a new world. He begs her to let him accompany her, but she refuses. He sneakily boards the bus, and even though he didn't have enough money for the fare, the compassionate conductor lets him in. After the bus left, he kept a close eye on Aunt Susan so she didn't notice him, and after a few minutes of driving, they came to a stop, and Aunt Susan alighted, and he closely followed her unnoticed until the gate man to the house she housekeeps for noticed him, and she was astonished to see him, but she took him in anyway. She introduces him to her boss's wife, after which he showers and changes into one of the children's clothes. He meets one of the children, Amy, who appears peculiar to him as they briefly exchange pleasantries. He assists his auntie in the kitchen and sets the table, despite the fact that it would have been difficult, but Abila is an instinctive young boy and managed to navigate through, and knowing he did it correctly gives him a sense of accomplishment. The family piqued his interest, and he watched as they ate. He noticed how neglectful the father, Mr. Bryan, was by bringing his work to the table and breaking his promise to his son, much to the chagrin of his wife and children. The situation worsened when Amy choked on her food, and her parents' futile attempts to make her feel better failed. Abila tries to assist, but the father objects. Eventually, he was persuaded to relent when his wife argued that they had nothing to lose. He told Bryan to lift her by the legs and hang her upside down. He then struck her abdomen with his hands wrapped in a towel, forcing the obstruction in her throat to fly out and saving her life. The family appreciated him for this one deed, so Bryan gave him a check for his father's rent and another for his mother. He also gave Abila a pencil box when he saw that he was interested in it. Bryan was even more surprised when Abila asked him the most bizarre question, "Are you happy?" To which he replied, "I don't know." Even though the Bryan's family was wealthy, he learned that material possessions aren't everything because he observed such sadness in all of them, especially Amy, whose mother controls every aspect of her life and in her room he spends the night. He becomes upset at his Aunt Susan when she doesn't wake him up on time the following morning. She recognized his need for sleep following his good deed the previous evening, for which she is grateful, and she complies with his request to go back to Kibera. When he arrives in Kibera, he rushes to beat the witch's deadline by first paying his father's rent, after which he returns the stolen phone to its rightful owner. There seems to be enough time for him to finish the last two tasks, so he follows a truck carrying another sign. It leads him to the rail track where the boys were preparing to play a game of chicken. As the approaching train with its honking horn approached, the boys all took their positions on the tracks. As the group gets smaller, Abila finds himself as the only person left standing who hasn't run away. He decides to face the terrifying snake that gives him the most anxiety. Abila then reclines and enters a trance in which he thinks about how Mr. Bryan's life differs from that of his father. The contrast between his father's apparent contentment, happiness, and presence in life and Mr. Bryan's apparent lack of it, makes it clear to him that time spent with loved ones, not money, is what truly makes life happy. Shiku finds him in his trance and tells him that the train tracks weren't the best place to look for answers. Actually, in reality the train hadn't run over him, and Shiku ultimately succeeds in saving him. He expresses his gratitude to her as they lie on the ground sharing some lovely moments together. It makes her happy that he can now be seen with her in public. He gives her the pencil box and assures her that he will see her in church before racing home to see his father after completing his tasks. To his surprise, his father is awake and healthy, and he couldn't help but stare at him as the witch's curse has been lifted. Though his father believes it's just a hangover, the boy couldn't tell him what he had gone through to reclaim his soul. He receives a warm hug from his mother, whom Auntie Susan informed about his good deed. The film concludes with the family attending church, and he finally gets to see Shiku, as he promised her. Towards the end of the film, Nyawawa could be seen skulking around her territory, clearly searching for new prey before returning. Abila, through his tasks, discovers information about the village that he was unaware of, as well as the reality of its residents. The storyline is used in the movie to depict the realities of living in Kenyan slums. Each person that Abila assists unintentionally has a positive knock-on effect on the neighborhood. Soulboy, a well-known African movie with a tight budget that explores how temptation has a real impact on people's lives, is both educational and thematic.